All right, welcome back to this section. In this episode, we are looking at divs. Okay, in our HTML series, we explain about divs, and we said divs are basically a container. Have it in mind that it's a container or a wrapper that can wrap our code or our elements. It's like we are putting the element inside that container. Okay, and divs works hand in hand with IDs and classes also. I said that when we get to CSS, we will understand it better, and here we are. So without much ado, let's dive in. Now, if you can see from here, I have made some house screen up here. So we can go ahead and do the same. Okay, so div is basically just a container. So let's see, we want to wrap this with a container. Okay, so open tag of the div and let's close it here and a closing tag. And we close it here. Okay, this is the open and the closing tag of our div. Now let's wrap this one too with a div. All right. So now if you save it and head towards our browser and refresh, we will not see any changes. Okay. So like I said, div is nothing. It's just a container. Even though we have put this content inside a container, it is just inside a container, nothing else. What makes divs a unique is that when you implement your CSS to it, when you begin to apply your CSS. Now what you do here is that let's give this div a class with an attribute name. Since this is our first div, let's call it what? Let's call it first container. Then we come back to the second one. This one, let's give it an ID. We can give it class, but I want us to understand the ID better. Then let's call it, okay, second container. The naming convention can be anything, but please make sure you use something that you can remember. You don't want to write maybe CMD or TTT. Even though if you use it to style it, it will work, but it should be something that you can remember. Okay, when you read the code, it will be reasonable, something like that. All right, so now what we do here is that we head towards our style sheet, then we style it. Now inside our style sheet, we'll call the class first. And remember, the extension for class is dot. Okay, so our first container, let's put some CSS. Now before anything, let's save it and see how it turns in our browser. We can see we give it a font style. Sorry, here should supposed to be style. Yes, a font style attribute of italic. Okay, and 20 bezels and our background color. Now let's save it and see how it turns in our browser. Refresh. Save this one to save the HTML to and the CSS and refresh. Now we can see the changes that it has been implemented. Okay, the font color we can see and the italic. And if you can take notes, it did not affect this our first heading. It did not affect it, and you know the reason, right? It's because it is not inside that container. This is not inside the div container. Okay, so it will not be affected. And if you can see, even though there's an h4 here and there's another h4 here, but and the p tag here and there's a p tag here, but when we head towards the code, it did not affect this one. Why? Because this is the closing tag of our container. Okay, so there's no way it will go all over and affect this one because this is where we close it. So that is where it's going to take effect. Okay, the styling is going to take effect. So that is basically that. Now let's implement some ID. Now let's save it and head towards our browser and refresh. And you can see that the code that we write for our ID taking effect here, right here. So these are the difference between the div with a class and the div with an ID. Okay, so the div is basically a container. It is nothing more, nothing less. A container or a wrapper that you can use to wrap your project, and you use the name convention that you use to wrap it to style it. Simple as that. Let's end here, come back on the next one and learn more. Thank you.